Hello, I am C3PO, and I believe the storyteller is ready, so let us begin.
This week, the story is about a movie that's often evaluated either as a part of a trilogy that largely didn't work or as the one saving grace in a trilogy that otherwise didn't work. And I really don't think that's all that fair because I think this movie, upon having watched it for the umpteenth time today, is actually very, very good unto itself as its own film. Talking, of course, about Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and specifically, we're going over our top 6 favorite things about this movie. Now, we've done these lists for The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones before. Basically, this trilogy of podcast episodes is kind of meant as a celebration of a time in the saga that's often considered fraught. So, Ross, what do you look for when you're trying to pinpoint the best parts of something that is not perfect, but you generally love?
Well, I mean, this certainly hits the bar on something that I love. And although it's not perfect, it's damn incredible. Revenge of the Sith is awesome, and I think one of the most underappreciated things that there is in Star Wars. And I think that certainly puts you in a good spot out of the get-go, is to know that just like it's enjoyable and it's fun. I mean, you're going to enjoy it and you're going to have fun when you're watching it, so that's beneficial. And so I think it's to not get hung up on that narrative that it's the prequels and that they have these issues. I mean, you can enjoy all of the prequel trilogy where you can still acknowledge that there are some issues in a few spots. In this movie in particular, Natalie Portman's acting and the lines given to her for Padme's dialogue are deeply terrible. They're just pathetic and awful. But when you kind of strip everything away and you look at anything else, either individually or how it fits in together with the greater saga or for this film on its own, and as long as you're being critical and in your thinking, and in even if you want to just be critical, you're not going to find too many things to complain about, but you are going to find a lot of things that make sense and connect. There aren't too many things that you can objectively say are bad, other than like something like that, bits of bad acting like Natalie Portman. But Hayden Christensen, for example, that's style. That's a choice. Those are decisions being made. And a lot of people hate those decisions, but I think that's also because, and something we talk a lot about, is the consistency of Darth Vader. And that's something that is necessary. And the consistency of Darth Vader is extremely strong in this movie. And I think that's probably the first place to start out if you want to kind of look at a movie like this, is you're able to see the story of Darth Vader. So it's what's going to be the first thing that's going to pull you in. Everybody, the point of the prequels was the fall of Darth Vader, and people thought they were going to see more of Darth Vader as we saw him before. But I think what's underappreciated, maybe right out of the get-go, is the fact that look at all the things around that are taking part in this transition.
Do you think that's an achievement of Hayden Christensen's performance, that he was able to capture something spiritually on the nose about the character of Darth Vader that he maybe didn't so successfully achieve in his first Star Wars movie? Or do you think that there's just something tonally specific about this movie that landed Darth Vader?
I think it's, of course, there's all those things in general, but I just think in terms of expectations, that's always one of the big things and one of the big criticisms I have for Rise of Skywalker. And I think a lot of people view this movie with a lens that if it's the last thing you're ever going to receive in Star Wars, if it's the last thing that Star Wars ever creates, then a lot of people didn't like it for that reason, because it was, okay, well, now I don't get XYZ. And a lot of people maybe had those problems with Rise of Skywalker because it prevents other things from occurring, because it is kind of it is the end of a story in this overall larger sense, and it can potentially leave you wanting more. And that feeling of lack of closure is a tough thing. I think this movie, because it has decades of thought put into it, is maybe a little more nuanced than you would ever expect it to be. And so that's really beneficial, is the fact that you're able to see these layers. I'm not saying Rise of Skywalker isn't nuanced. I'm saying that I think the acting performances are probably significantly more nuanced than the film itself. Whereas this movie, Hayden Christensen, that's a nuanced performance, but nuanced decision making by George Lucas as well. maybe you can throw it in the Natalie Portman for being just the pure bad, but a lot of it is decision making, and that's fun. And so you can just view the whole thing with a really critical and creative eye. And so I wouldn't necessarily just boil it down to just the Darth Vader side of it. I was more using that as an example of how you can view the movie.
No, and actually, my first installment on the list, which we'll get to shortly, kind of reflects something that's I think noteworthy about this movie, which is that it just tonally feels very different from many other Star Wars movies, and maybe that was a choice made after some failure on the part of the production of episodes 1 and 2, although that seems unlikely because George doesn't tend to be moved by things if he doesn't have to be. He has a singular vision. But there is something like George has always attested that this saga is for kids, that these movies are kids' movies first and foremost. And this is one of the 4 Star Wars movies that he wrote and directed, and it's not a kids' movie at all. Not like,
No.
and I really noticed that this time, and I've gone back and forth a couple of times on whether or not this is decidedly the best movie in the prequels, or if we just got to saying that and actually it's also deeply flawed. And maybe
It's decidedly
both things are true. Yeah, it is the best, and I enjoyed it on a more nuanced level than I have, I think, in a number of years when I watched it today. But also not a kids movie and not funny. I'm going to talk about that in my first installment. It's, I think, other than Rogue One, the least funny Star Wars movie.
That's maybe the case, but it definitely I think it has a lot of charm, and I think if you look at the purpose of the film, it's pretty understandable that there's not a ton of humor.
Sure.
And I think that it does a good job front loading the humor.
That's right. Do you mind if I kick this off, because we're really kind of dancing around some of my subject matter here?
Sure. I was gonna say, do you want me to just kind of kick things into it? But by the sounds of it, your number 6 is kind of what we're already talking about. So let's go right into it.
That's the thing, because I kind of perceive this movie as decidedly and deliberately not a comedy in the way the other Star Wars movies are adventurous romps. And specifically, I wanted to highlight the R2-D2 comedy as my number 6 favorite thing about Revenge of the Sith, because though it's overall got a lot of doom and gloom, episode 3, there is some signature cheekiness in the opening rescue mission in particular, and then in the ensuing arrest by General Grievous's people. So it's so hilarious when R2 completely wigs out in order to like gain control or to allow the Jedi to take control again over the enemy. And every little flap and door on his headpiece opens up, and every little gadget inside shoots out like a spear, and he looks insane for a second. And it's just
Swiss Army R2.
Swiss Army R2 is just a really great case of good guy getting the jump on the bad guy. That sequence, as well as just previous to that, when R2 uses his oil diffuser and then his blowtorch to attack 2 droids. It's some of the best droid action in the movie. In fact, there's not a lot of great droid action in this movie in general, excluding, if you want to consider Grievous a droid, excluding his lightsaber fight, which happens later on. Droids are largely sidelined in episode 3, but R2's really good in those first 15 minutes.
Oh, absolutely. Interestingly enough, when I was watching this with Leslie, I got to the point where Obi-Wan faces off against Grievous, and for the sake of time and budget, you know how they're about to do like this big face off, and then Grievous gets in, he just introduces his Magna Guards, and it's like, you guys, you can fight these guys instead. And then Obi-Wan just draws the giant kind of vent from the ceiling and crushes them. There's supposed to be a big fight there, but in order to save time and budget, to not have to animate all of that and create kind of a CG mocap kind of clusterfuck for Ewan McGregor to have to try and sort out with a bunch of people wearing dots and whatnot, they just decided to cut that entire sequence.
It was pretty effective, because there's a couple of CG moments in this movie that don't necessarily age so well, although not that many. And that's not a place where I noticed the Band-Aid.
No, absolutely not. And it's specifically R2's humor, and I love the relationship that Anakin has with R2. I think that's in particular a really strong part of the comedy of R2. Whether that's like him doing like the "Get him R2" with the little buzz droid on his Jedi starfighter, or whether it's no loose wire jokes. He's trying. All right. I didn't say anything.
Something that's not really dissected very often is the emotion of R2-D2 as it relates to Anakin Skywalker, because droid or not a droid, this is a droid that feels something. In fact, most droids in Star Wars are. And a lot has been said about how it's, a plot hole that R2 doesn't seem to remember Obi-Wan, or vice versa, or Darth Vader doesn't seem to remember R2. I'm not too worried about that, but R2 is probably harboring some kind of mixed feelings about the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge angle, and in particular, it's very noticeable. Like the Clone Wars, their relationship grows even more. So that's another really big part of R2-D2. Am I lagging a lot on your end? Is it just my face, or is
Yeah,
it?
you are a little bit. Becky's on a Zoom call downstairs, which I didn't consider would probably be disruptive, but hopefully that doesn't drag on for too much longer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Is my audio fine though?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, that's good then. Yeah, overall, R2-D2 is used really well in this film. There's some plot holes to the fact that he gets a lot of these tools removed from him while he's kind of under Antilles' ownership, and that makes a lot of sense. Probably because he maybe was very easily viewed as a non-regulation R2, and maybe there was some missions where R2 did some spying for the rebels, maybe early in that time period. It would maybe make some sense. We don't have any stories, so it could be interesting to kind of see.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I guess we'll move on to your number 6. This is your 6th favorite thing about Episode 3.
My number 6 would be, in my opinion, the best fight from this gentleman, the man who would refer to our lightsabers as swords more so, and that would be Anakin's absolute disrespectful slaughtering of Count Dooku and the decapitation and what should be the end of the Clone Wars, but overall is a phenomenal sequence from the start of Anakin not rushing Dooku and Obi-Wan doing that kind of like they do the little banter back and forth over like, oh, I was just going to say that I was going to rush him the way I did last time and, lose my hand. And then you have to go and take him. And then we don't get the 2-on-1 advantage. But pretty soon into it, Obi-Wan gets his ass handed to him and he gets thrown and taken out of the fight. And Anakin becomes so incredibly powerful. You see that his powers have doubled. He's so incredibly strong. He's fighting with this anger and hatred. You have fear, you have anger, but you don't use them. And so with that right there, Dooku is he's just setting himself up, and you get to see Palpatine watching his old apprentice fighting his new apprentice, and he's pushing him along. And so it really is a great start to the domino fall of Anakin Skywalker. And then the end of the Clone Wars with that. But it's also just a badass lightsaber fight. And Anakin gives Obi-Wan his fate will be the same as ours, and you get to see a lot of that Palpatine and Vader coming out in these two characters. So I think it's an excellent kickoff to the film, and a fight sequence that, if a little bit longer, would be worthy of the main fight sequence in a film, but not in this film.
Isn't it amazing how often our main criticism of a lightsaber fight is that it's not long enough, which really is probably done deliberately at this point. Like we should get out of here and leave them wanting more. That's like a classic storytelling device. I also think it's an excellent way to start the film. So I'm kind of hung up on something. Maybe I just misunderstood about what you just said about how this really should be the end of the Clone Wars. Do you mean it should be a part of the TV series, or it should be the end of Episode 2?
No, sorry. I mean that in the sense that Grievous is not a formidable enough leader to lead the Clone Wars to continue on as a war. So this is Anakin putting he's closing the coffin. Obi-Wan nails it shut by being sent to Utapau to kill Grievous. And that also spurns Anakin a little bit in the sense that Anakin is the one who ends the Clone Wars. And he's not given kind of the opportunity to join Obi-Wan to go take out Grievous and officially end the Clone Wars, which, I mean, Anakin shouldn't want to do that, but Palpatine knows that he wants more, and he's not like Jedi, and he does crave power, and he is cocky, and so he craves opportunity like that. But it's just in the sense that Dooku is the only reason that this war can persist. That's the reason why Palpatine needs to keep him for so long, is that Dooku's the only one strong enough to lead all of the separatist worlds into thinking that there's something. He is a courageous and respected enough and well-spoken enough leader that he's got the respect that Grievous just doesn't have.
Yeah, I think the only thing it's lacking is that we haven't really had an opportunity, at least not in this movie. There's a little bit of it in Attack of the Clones, but in general, Count Dooku is kind of underserved. I think we've talked about that on the podcast before. We kind of don't reach quite a menacing pinnacle for that character, but it doesn't really matter in this case because we know enough to know that he's dangerous and he's powerful and he is the enemy. And we also know what the heroes in the movie don't know at this point, which is that Palpatine is the real enemy. And so we can start to see the puppet mastery at work already. And that's what makes this a really important scene for the development of the character of Darth Vader. And it really establishes immediately, as soon as you started this movie, okay, now watch this guy turn.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get to see kind of that, the back and forth, but then even Palpatine brings up the Sand People. I think there should be more Qui-Gon in this fight. I think Qui-Gon should be used as a taunting point from Dooku to Anakin, more so than even just because he uses it with Obi-Wan. But I mean, you would think Palpatine would try to share the knowledge with Dooku to play on the Qui-Gon relationship, or maybe that was dangerous. Maybe that was something Palpatine specifically didn't want. He just didn't want Qui-Gon ever brought up, because Qui-Gon was a good thing for Anakin, but at the same time, pulling on heartstrings was kind of Palpatine's favorite thing to do with Anakin, to torture him that way. So
I love that idea because, I mean, this movie ends after everything, after Mustafar, after the suit, after the funeral, after literally everything. We have that final little meeting between Obi-Wan and Yoda. About Qui-Gon, and it's a real source of emotional joy for Obi-Wan. And now that you mention it, it would be that really should, yes, it should be a callback, not just a random first mention of Qui-Gon for the first time in a really long time. It should be bookending the film emotionally for Obi-Wan, who is still caught up in that trauma. I love that. I kind of wish it was there. It never occurred to me before.
Yeah, and that sequence at the end of the film was initially a little bit longer, and you do get a minor Qui-Gon. I don't know whether he showed up in a version of the script or just continued to speak to Obi-Wan a little bit towards the end of the film as well. But I think that's going to be 100% leaned into for the Obi-Wan show. Will be about his understandings of becoming a Force ghost through Qui-Gon and the teachings that Yoda had set up for him there. And that actually was my number 7 moment. That was my honorable mention that just missed the cut line, was that final kind of Bail Organa, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and then, of course, the very end of the conversation, which Qui-Gon? Just the excitement from Obi-Wan is wonderful.
Me too. I'm going to move on to number 5, my 5th favorite thing about this movie. And I think I've actually just isolated a lot of moments, not so much moments or actually filmmaking aspects.
I think that's the way to do it.
Here I'm highlighting the Order 66 montage.
That's my number 5.
Oh, amazing. Okay, let's
perfect.
A big old chat then. I'm not picking it just because it's given our podcast its name, although it's a really well executed depiction, I think, of how the galaxy came to be the way that it is when we first experienced it back in 1977. And it's really elegant storytelling. You know how I'm always fixated on whether or not this is a good idea for the overall story. It's a brutal depiction, and it's classic war movie making. My only criticism is that it's really not clearly demonstrated, and you can speak to this a little bit as a student of the canon. It's not exactly clear in this montage to what extent the Jedi at large are able to evade this attack. Now we see a handful of key assassinations, some of them which frankly are a little lame. And then we're also kind of led to believe that maybe there's some other Jedi out there who managed to get away, Yoda being one of them. And I'd like to know a little bit more about that. But the fact that clone troopers are able to dummy the most powerful Jedi in the world is fine. I would just like it to be a little bit better explained, I think. That said, the smash cut of all of the devastating kills set to John Williams, Of course, that visual of Yoda dropping his cane. It's one of the saga's moments.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I guess to kind of answer that right at the get-go is that's the brilliance of it all, is that not only is Palpatine clouding the Force, he has a proxy across the galaxy that he has been building trust with the Jedis for 3 years. The Jedi can't sense that the clones are going to turn on them because the clones can't sense that they're going to turn on them. The clones don't think that they're turning on them either. So the clones don't also have like this sudden like guilt immediately before they're about to do what they're about to do. The Jedis have to realize last minute that the clones change targets. That's all it is. It's just they're changing targets in their war. And so they're just walking along. Oh, our target's right in front of us. Let's set up our turret and let's take out the Jedi. Or, are we all ready to do this? Let's just shoot her in the back right now. This is easy. Perfect. Or, we want to swing back and just use our speeders. It seems like a swift move. So there's thousands and thousands of Jedi in the galaxy at this point, and only a few survive. We don't know exactly how many survive, and that's the point of the next 19 years, is that Vader and his Inquisitors hunt down the rest of them, and that pretty much the only ones they can't find who have any association left with the Force and are still in the galaxy are Obi-Wan and Yoda. And so the other ones, whether it's Ahsoka or Ezra or potentially other Force users that we may find out are alive during this time period, they're just not galactically available. And interestingly, Obi-Wan mentions to Ezra in Rebels, and it's a really fun kind of, you understand it, but Obi-Wan understands it. It's from multiple points of view. He says to Ezra, "You're not supposed to be here." And it's almost like the fans are like, oh, so all those times when people were like, what do you mean there's some Jedi who's right before A New Hope that he must die right before the end of the show? That doesn't make sense. But Obi-Wan's just being like, this is just not your place or your time. Why are you running into me? I'm like, you have this other destiny. And he ultimately gets blasted out of the galaxy not too far from there. And so Obi-Wan was right that he didn't belong there. But then kind of circling all of this back to Order 66, that's the chessboard that Palpatine has set up. He's able to set up to make sure that all the most powerful Jedi have now fallen into this bureaucratic system where the most powerful ones have risen to the top. And so that all of those ones have clone troops. All of those have literal battalions of people who follow them, who can turn on them. So the people who you wouldn't need to necessarily hunt out because they're already right there and primed up. And so it's so brilliant to see Cody being one of the only clones that we meet in the movies, Obi-Wan's direct clone, who hands him his lightsaber and then just a couple seconds later shoots him. And so it's just a slap across the face. And like you said, it's visually really cool to watch. And it's a gut punch. But yeah, Order 66, I can't wait to see it from more different angles. We saw in Jedi Fallen Order, you get to see it from a different angle, from another Jedi's perspective, and then through like different comics and whatnot. So it's been very cool to see this story told, and you can tell it thousands of times more with different Jedi.
Well, that's the thing. We saw it most recently with Ahsoka at the end of the Clone Wars, which you and I broke down. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it Cody who then has like a crisis of faith and somehow manages to overcome his programming?
Rex.
Oh, it's Rex. Right.
Rex and Cody are the two most popular clones, so that's understandable. Rex generally was Anakin's right-hand clone, and Cody was generally Obi-Wan's right-hand clone.
How does Rex do that?
He doesn't. He's remember Ahsoka kind of does a mini operation on him. He's able to somewhat resist, in part because Ahsoka is a glitch in the system, and so he's able to, because she leaves the Jedi Order, and so he's able to have a momentary kind of hesitation bit of, what's my programming? And because he has a programming issue, it almost allows his conscience to slip in, kind of. And that's enough for Ahsoka to get away and then get the droids to put him into a room where she was able to kind of strap him down and just get the inhibitor chip out of his head.
And is it Rex who, going forth, becomes like a high-ranking member of the Rebel Alliance?
Yes, absolutely. And so we're going to likely see in the Bad Batch efforts made by Rex to free other clones, provide them their agency back. And it would be interesting to, that's just a heavy assumption because he does free other clones in providing them their agency that we see he's done by the point of Rebels. So it makes sense for him to do that in the Bad Batch. And so whether it's the Bad Batch, Cody is rumored to be coming back in the Obi-Wan show. So Order 66 is going to get continuously more and more weight added to it. And so, like you said, it's such a focal point for all of Star Wars, but it is also incredibly important for this movie, whether it's Yoda having that kind of heartbreaking moment where he still has to kind of jump up and decapitate a couple clones who he'd been there building a relationship with and encouraging individuality. That's the very first episode of the Clone Wars that ever airs, is Yoda like spending time with clones and kind of correcting them when they refer to themselves as disposable and being just the same as one another. And he's like no, not to the Force. All of you are different. All of you unique signatures you are, unique beings. And I don't remember his exact wording, but to see that as the first episode they air of the Clone Wars, another like gut punch when you see him have to do that. So just overall, you see these Jedi, they get more stories in the Clone Wars, and so that's nice as well. But also it makes this sequence even harder.
It's just really elegant storytelling. So rarely when you're trying to build like a great epic, is there a really easy solution for how to make everything fit together? And this is just like a flip of the switch. This is how all the stormtroopers become what they are, at least at their genesis. And so, yeah, Order 66, pretty great idea and really well executed in this movie. Is that all you want to say about that?
Yeah, I know I kind of rambled on a little bit there. So yeah, that works for me.
My number 4 is just like a concept. It's just the general tragic irony of Anakin's good intentions in this movie. I think the charge that's most often leveled at Revenge of the Sith is that it's poorly paced, and that's something we've kind of been dancing around already this evening. And that it's not so believable that Anakin turns to the dark side as suddenly as he does. And maybe that's a little bit true, but I would wager that if this movie stood alone, if it didn't have any prequels or sequels, it was just this movie about a guy who is turned to the dark side to save his wife. It was like a Mario Puzo or something. I think that you wouldn't feel that way at all. It would feel like a very graceful transition for the main characters or the anti-heroes' internal morals. Anakin is seduced, well, like I said, pretty gracefully. We joke around about Darth Plagueis the Wise, and that's kind of a component of what I'm listing right here. It's actually an amazingly written scene. It's another one of those scenes that kind of brings everything together. In general, the idea, I'm not phrasing this very well, but what I'm trying to say is that this idea that Anakin essentially causes the death he's trying to prevent with the anger that he's only accessing to prevent that death in the first place. It's very ironic. It's clever storytelling. And it ultimately validates how hasty his turn to the dark side is. It had to be haphazard. It's hasty for him too. He's got whiplash as much as anybody else. But it doesn't seem sudden. It doesn't seem unnatural. It's supposed to be lunatic fast, breakneck fast, because Palpatine works that way.
Yeah, Palpatine even tells him, "No, I need you. You have to go literally slaughter the entire Jedi Temple now, because it's the only way you're going to gain the strength in the darkness." And it works. He's able to then go to Mustafar, and he's able to kill a bunch more separatist leaders with complete ease. But at the same time, it's just he's building a body count of just killing for the sake of killing. And that's extremely dark. And I mean, it starts out right away with the fact that he chops off Mace Windu's hands, and then things go downhill from there. But the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. Is that, or the road to hell is paved with good intentions? Is that the saying? And that's very much the way it is with Anakin. And I mentioned it before. Who are you going to pick? You're going to pick your wife and your father-like mentor, or are you going to pick your supervisor who will only give you a half promotion and has universally for over a decade not trusted you?
Right.
I mean, it makes no. Of course, you're going to side with Palpatine and Padme. Because that's the way he sees it as. And then he doesn't realize when he goes and talks with Padme, it's just like, oh shit, she didn't side with me.
I
Crap.
guess I don't.
And that's kind of the whole point.
I don't even quite see it that way. I don't even think he's like not siding with the Jedi, because he says he kind of like reiterates the dogmatic narrow views of the Jedi when he says the good guys are evil. They only think about other people. Like that's not really true. Like to refute that on Palpatine's part is pretty easy because of course they have an agenda. Certainly Mace Windu does.
Yeah.
But Anakin does have an inherent sense of what is right and wrong. He knows it's wrong to kill younglings. It's just most important to him that he protect Padme and his unborn baby. Like it's very hard for him to make any other decision. It's not even really necessarily about the temptation of the dark side. He is just convinced that it's the only way to save his wife. And the entire dialogue between him and Padme through this movie is, look, all that matters is that we have each other. The only thing that matters is that we love each other. Your love is the only thing that keeps me going. And so if he were to lose that and she were to die the way he lost his mother, he truly would have nothing in his point of view. And so he has no other choice but to follow Palpatine. Now, conversely, Palpatine's instructions to Anakin to go kill all those younglings, kill every other Jedi, do a bunch of killing immediately is twofold. Palpatine needs it done, but more importantly, he needs to make sure Anakin doesn't have a crisis of faith and change his mind. He needs to make sure Anakin gets a bunch of kills under his belt so that he's too far gone and has nowhere else to turn but to Sheev.
Yeah, exactly. Because when he goes and talks to Padme, it's just like, no, only my new powers can save you. And it's just like, what?
Right.
Like, this is not like I can overthrow him. We can run the galaxy the way that we want. And it's just, it's like, do you not remember the conversation you had in Attack of the Clones? It's just like she specifically says she didn't think that one person should make the decisions for the galaxy. I thought you were much too frightened to tease the senator, Anakin. You should know a little bit better here. There is some whiplash for sure, but he makes a clear decision when he cuts off Mace's hands.
Yep.
And at that point, he has made the clear that everything is about saving Padme. And it's just easier after you chop off Mace Windu's hands to then side with Palpatine. I'm not saying it's then easier to kill a bunch of people, but that's why Palpatine does it, because then he says, okay, if you do then kill a bunch of people, everything else after this is going to be easy. So just do this one more, murder spree, and then it'll be fine.
That's why I'm saying the irony of that choice is kind of one of my favorite things in this movie. And in particular, like I actually think the pacing of this movie gets a bad rap because that series of events that leads to that ultimate turn makes perfect sense to me. And it certainly did on this view. So that's why I wanted to kind of celebrate that. Should we move on to your number 4?
Yes, absolutely. My number 4 is also about Anakin, and mine would be, in particular, his sense of humor in the first half of the movie, for that matter, whether that's from the banter with Obi-Wan about another happy landing, and at least they're flying half a ship. I know there's both Obi-Wan lines, but they're about Anakin's doings. Whether it's Anakin with the buzz droids and the vulture droids and trying to save Obi-Wan, his back and forths with R2, his work in the elevator shaft and kind of jumping back down and cutting the hole in the roof. Just overall, you get to see a cunning warrior and a good friend to Obi-Wan. And it's the Anakin Skywalker that is the Anakin in the Clone Wars. He's cool. He's just overall, he is the hero of the galaxy. He's the poster boy, as Obi-Wan calls him later on, and rightfully so. It's just an hour of Anakin Skywalker being incredible, taking out Count Dooku and putting Grievous in a position where he has to run away, taking down Grievous's ship, saving the Chancellor, saving half of the ship, and doing it all with like some serious style. And that's Anakin Skywalker for you, but he's got a good sense of humor in it. This is where the fun begins. It's just overall a really cool start to the movie. You don't get the whininess from the last two movies. The whininess does return later on in this film, but in an appropriate way. Darth Vader is a whiny character. Luke Skywalker's a whiny character. Skywalkers are whiny. That's kind of their thing.
Yep.
But this is maybe one of the coolest hours of some skywalking there is. And Anakin lives up to the title of the Chosen One in making the council in the first half of this movie for sure.
I think that's a really good call. You've talked a lot about how Anakin in the Clone Wars is such a cool character, that he's just he's a great reparation for some of what's lacking in Hayden Christensen's interpretation or his that version of Anakin anyway. And so maybe you're able to see live action Anakin in a different way. I think many of us tend to see the whininess ahead of the sense of humor, ahead of the renegade Mr. Cool action hero. But it's there. And it's certainly there early on in this movie. I guess that's the best version of Anakin that we get from Hayden Christensen, because Attack of the Clones is a very bad movie. And well, not, I know we love it, but like it is the worst one. And this movie is a very good movie. And so he has a lot of opportunities to shine as a hero, not just as an anti-hero.
Yeah, absolutely. But you also get a lot of the back and forth. And like you mentioned, like I mentioned before with the Dooku sequence, the fact that you get those two kind of contrasting back and forth right here really does show all those angles. And I think that's what Hayden Christensen does a great job of, and Matt Lanter does a great job in the Clone Wars, is being able to play along the edges that make the dark side seem so close. And yet it's all such heroic actions that it's, oh, well, there's no way this character would do bad. But everything that they're doing in the name of good has an air of bad about them. And so that's Anakin Skywalker for you. And like, this is where the fun begins. It's a Han Solo line. And so it really, really works for the character being cool and being a lot of inspiration for the Clone Wars and what the Anakin that we get through that is. And I adore that Anakin as well. So this certainly kicks things off well.
So my number 3 is kind of a continuation of my last one. I guess in this particular viewing, I was just in a certain mood to receive it in a particular way, but this is a new addition to this list. It's not something that ever would have made my list before. And it's really specifically the moment that Anakin realizes he has to do what he has to do. I've never connected with this particular scene until today, but there's an eerily quiet
Ruminations
moment. I guess it's
the song being played is it's Padme's Ruminations, and they're kind of like looking across Coruscant. That's what you're referring to.
That's right. So yeah, it's basically this like cut between Padme and Anakin, not together, but they're both looking at different windows across the Coruscant skyline. And Anakin is considering Palpatine's temptations, and he sheds a single tear, which is a little goofy, but whatever. And it feels to me like that's the moment when he decides, in spite of his better instincts, that he has to do what he has to do. And obviously he's wrong to think that way. But that's kind of what makes it sad. And ultimately I do, because we're talking a little bit about the woodenness of Hayden Christensen's performance tonight. That's an overly stated thing. I have faith in Hayden's growth as an actor. I'm super excited to see him play this character again. Probably a better actor or an actor directed differently could have made this particular scene unforgettable. And it is kind of forgettable, although it really resonated with me in this particular viewing. And regardless of how forgettable it is, I think it's really important to the turn of Anakin. And so I wanted to give that scene a moment.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to put it. It's giving Anakin that moment. It's giving the audience the moment to see the fact that, yes, you may think it's going to be a quick turn, but this is literally, we're taking a pause in a movie for like almost a minute here to let you know that the character is going through deep internal struggle. They're being torn apart. And that's really important. You're able to see that the character is having this struggle. It's not an easy decision for them, and that clearly it's one that they're able. It's almost like the Luke Leia at the end of Empire Strikes Back, where it's the conversation across the skyline, and but it's without words, and Padme doesn't have the Force, so she doesn't know exactly what's going on. But Anakin is really, he's contemplating what he's about to do. And you see the look in Padme's face. It's just kind of sad and confused. And Anakin's is scared. It's like, what is he going to do? Like, am I really about to do this? And when he makes up his mind, with conviction, and he goes and he walks with vigor towards Palpatine's office. And so it's a tough one where he's supposed to be waiting in the council chambers, and he can't do it. He can't sit still. He tries, but all he sees in his mind is what's slipping through his fingers and what he won't be able to protect.
That's right. I don't have a whole lot more to say about it. It is interesting that you compared it to that Empire Strikes Back Luke Leia interface, because I thought of that as well. It is notably different because there's not a Force-based communication happening here, but that also is a good thing to distinguish it from the Luke and Leia of it all, because Anakin is doing this alone. And that's kind of the biggest thing that differs him from his son, is that Luke is never alone. He always has allies, and Vader is, even when Anakin does have allies, he rejects them. So I guess that's kind of the biggest difference here. That's a great metaphor about how in his partnership with Padme, he still doesn't have what he needs.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting angle that I didn't quite look at it in the same kind of in that way. But that is a really good point, that Luke, his friends are able to satisfy more within him, and like Anakin says, and he wants more, and that always that lust for more and control ultimately here is. And she doesn't really understand what's going on, but like you said, he's doing all the work, but it's his control and his obsession that's ultimately making the decision for him. And this then cuts to my number 3, which is the fight between Mace and Palpatine. And so the overall arc of what's going on there. So that fits in really, really well. The
Just
way that
the movie.
I know we are, but it's working quite perfectly in the way that we're kind of bouncing back and forth on these. But it's a really good fight. It's slow in a couple spots, but the way it starts out with this kind of like, you are under arrest, and the meme upon meme from Palpatine, and the scream swirl, and then the killing the other Jedis. So it's a little too quick, but then you get to see an angry and forceful duel occur. And you're able to see this like really cool like window smash sequence, and the lightning back and forth, the taunting of Anakin, the turn of Anakin Skywalker, in particular, the mirrors that Palpatine does between Anakin and Mace, and Anakin and Dooku from the beginning of the film, and how that is so direct but very different because of the way that the players involved are positioned in the sequence. And that is extremely well done to show so much poetry within the same film, something that Star Wars loves to do. And to have that rhyme there. It is a little bit quick after in the way that Vader is pronounced, but you see so much change in one swift sequence. And Palpatine being like, and finally showing his true face, Mace Windu ultimately showing his true face, the way that Palpatine wants Anakin to see it, whereas he isn't really. But at the same time, Anakin killed Dooku without trial and hated it, but did it for Padme. And Mace Windu wants to kill Palpatine without trial, but Anakin won't allow that because of Padme. And ultimately, that's where, no, it's not about morality for you, Anakin. It's about Padme. And it ultimately, as much as yeah, you could say that that's one thing, but you can't have it both ways, Anakin. And it makes for a great sequence. But we also just touched a lot about it through the Ruminations scene. I kind of classified it a little differently to be a little bit more holistic and to kind of lean a little bit more on the end. But the way Anakin is being like, they're both yelling at him, like, don't listen to him, Anakin. And it's just, oh, I'm too weak. And it's really, really great, because then you'll get just this look on Anakin's face of just like, I don't know what to do. He has to make a split decision, and he makes the wrong one, but everything, the spark has been set and Palpatine wins just like that.
I mean, I guess the biggest difference between the assassination of Count Dooku and the attempted assassination on Palpatine by Mace Windu is that Mace Windu is right. Like, he is too dangerous to be kept alive, and he does have the votes, right? And so,
Yes.
like, if he were to stand trial, he'd get off. It all feels too real. And I don't know if that's the case politically speaking for Count Dooku. Maybe it is, but I mean, Palpatine obviously swayed the final murder in both of those sequences because Anakin is feeble-minded at his hands. One of the great moments, I'm not sure you mentioned just now, is when that's over and Mace Windu is dead and Anakin is kind of reeling from what he's just done, and Palpatine puts up his hood for the first time. Like, that's clearly a very ceremonious thing where you're like, okay, now I know we've seen this guy already in the hood in this movie, but we haven't seen him do the transition. And so that's where it's all very, very real.
Yeah, he walks like the Emperor the entire movie, which is great, because that's, of course, leading in. So you don't need to have him change his strut as well. But he does definitely blend beautifully into the Emperor. And so to have him become hideous and then the hood comes up, it is a great transition there. And actually, that does go well into my number two. But what's your number two?
Well, my number two, I suspect we can cut this short if it's going to come up again a few more, although we're kind of getting down to the nitty gritty here. Mine is obligatorily "You Were the Chosen One," and it's that whole monologue.
Well, it's kind of a hard one. Like, what'd you like? Yeah, I don't know. How did you separate did you separate your one and your two at all similar?
Yes, my number one is completely different.
Okay, no, never mind then. Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the incredible Battle of the Heroes. This is my number one. And so the entire overall sequence, the Battle of the Heroes, the "You Were the Chosen One," "You Are my brother, Anakin," the entire sequence on Mustafar. This is incredible.
Hang on a second. Do you want to do your number two first? Have we thrown off the order?
We have, but it's your number two. And so it doesn't matter, right?
Okay. All right, let's just do it now.
Let's just talk about
yes.
Mustafar. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we've praised this scene again and again on this podcast. I mean, I think it's objectively the greatest heartbreak in all the series. It's the time when you feel the most sad in all of Star Wars, and or at least, yes, the death of Han Solo and like, but this is like where the story is evoking the most overall tragedy.
Definitely.
It's performed exquisitely by Obi-Wan. And the thing about Ewan McGregor is that he's often given credit for being the most consistently excellent part of the prequels, and that is true, but it's a largely easier job than Hayden Christensen had, I think.
Definitely.
And frankly, also Natalie Portman. Like, yes, he gets to be an action hero. It's physically exertive, but it's a less thankless role to be Obi-Wan, because he's kind of like second banana for most of the trilogy, except for here, where his responsibility is to invoke like the strongest amount of pain and disappointment imaginable. He completely nails it. It is the creation of the monster that is Darth Vader. We've already seen him like turn to the dark side, like in his brain and in his heart, but this is where he actually becomes the cyborg and the disfigured Darth Vader that is iconic. And that's what you've been waiting for this entire trilogy. And yet he is upstaged by Obi-Wan's monologue, which tears your heart out. The language is simple and poignant. The blocking of it and like the coloration of the sequence, symbolic, intense. I think, technically speaking, it's probably the best scene George Lucas has directed in his career.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, or well, in terms of getting the credit for the direction of it, I would say yes, because I mean, he definitely had a lot of involvement with Return of the Jedi as well, and so you can maybe make some argument there. But yeah, I would say I would tend to agree with you that this is incredible. The words that Obi-Wan says, like the pain that he's emoting, the look on his face and the look on Anakin's face, but him just not being able to look at Anakin, and this just sheer disappointment. You were the chosen one, and everything that Qui-Gon had asked of him, and everything that they had done together, all those 9 instances that Anakin saved his life, and all of the times through the Clone Wars where Anakin saved the lives of thousands, and it's just all for naught. And he's so incredibly disappointed. And they've had this gigantic duel where they've gone back and forth. They know each other so well. They're brothers. And it was so clearly shown in this duel where they just read each other's minds left and right. And there was even points where they wouldn't even cross sabers because they were playing chicken with one another, in the sense that they were both just doing these ridiculous spins, trying to find the one opportunity to come in at one another. And they both do it at the exact same time. You just see throughout the fight, and as much as it's so acrobatic and over the top, of course it is. And the way it ends, using the same, Anakin trying to use the move that Obi-Wan uses on Maul, and the I have the high ground and don't try it, and the arrogance that comes from that, and Obi-Wan learning where Anakin doesn't, and what that means for their next encounter, which we're going to find out about, and whether or not it's spiritual or physical, and whether or not their next physical encounter is on the Death Star or in the Obi-Wan show. It's still also, you get to see a lot of this return again in their confrontation on the Death Star. But I'm so excited for what this is going to mean for the next time these two meet up. I was but the learner, now I am the master. So I'm expecting Obi-Wan to win if they face each other again. But it goes to show that, yeah, ultimately in the end, Anakin was stronger. He couldn't beat Obi-Wan because he had all this anger within him, and it clouded his judgment. If Anakin was if Anakin had clear mind and he had to just do a sparring session with Obi-Wan, he beat Obi-Wan 10 times out of 10. But because of the anger, and as much as that makes him stronger and gives him focus, as Palpatine would like to say, it does cloud him at the same time. And Obi-Wan's understanding of him and the ability to see clearly, it's extremely it's just an extremely powerful scene, and it ages so well. I could watch the scene 100 times over and it still wouldn't lose any emotional weight.
One of the reasons it's going to be so critical to see them face each other again, and hopefully like do battle one-on-one, is that, I mean, obviously a lot of time has passed between this particular Mustafar duel and the one that was the original duel between them in A New Hope. And so they've both had time to reckon with their emotions over what happened that day. But even still, what happens between them when Obi-Wan is struck down is decidedly unemotional. It's very cold, and yes, there's dialogue about how they are old associates, but it's not clear that he once loved him, and that's partly because it wasn't clear to George at that time. But like, it's so heartbroken and emotional here, and we need to see some kind of middle in between those two states. Does that make sense?
I think that that's a really good point, and that's because it goes back to what happens in Return of the Jedi. In A New Hope, you're right, he is detached, and in Return of the Jedi, you say, Obi-Wan specifically said that the good man who was your father is gone. What's left is twisted and evil. And he doesn't think there's any Anakin left there anymore. And so we need to see his belief that Anakin could still return to, no, this is just Obi-Wan needing to teach this Vader guy a lesson about how the Force works, and how, oh, you know how the one thing you wanted was to live forever and make others live forever? Kill me, and guess what? Gonna live forever. And so it's it's another one of those kind of taunting moments, and it's used just purely to service the relationship between, like, he even waits until Luke is able to view them. He's just waiting for Luke to be an eye shot, and then he's like, okay, now you can kill me, Vader. Let me do my battle meditation like Qui-Gon. You don't even realize the fact that you're disrespecting your very first master by killing me during battle meditation. But I'm going to make this even a little bit more of a dirty cut. But it's going to be really exciting to see them face each other there. Also, you were my brother. I loved you. The line being at one point, I love you, but I can't help you. And Obi-Wan saying he can't still love him. He has to, if he loved him still, then he would help him. He has to say loved, because he has to begin the detachment process. And George Lucas was like, yeah, I agree with that. And I thought that was like, oh, that's a really cool, like, behind the scenes nugget there. And you can see the mouthing of the help, because Anakin he's asking for help. He's trying to come back. And Obi-Wan knows that, no, this is just a burning corpse saying what he needs to.
Right, but that's something I never thought about before. But there's such a, and I talked a little bit about the simplicity of this dialogue, and what you just said. What could have been the line is good, but this is better because of, in part, because of loved you. There is a difference. The back and forth is I loved you, and what does Anakin scream? I hate you. Current, present tense, and there's something subtly distinct about those two things. I loved you in the past. I hate you in the present, respectively, by different characters. But Obi-Wan doesn't say I hate you. He could never hate him.
Yeah.
That just, like, very clear, like, distinctions with how they think about other people. and in general, like, lead with love, lead with hate. I didn't say that very well, but there's those two lines, as they contrast each other, really kind of say everything you need to know about the two different ideologies of the characters.
Yeah, and also absolutely, but and then of course the pain behind this scene. Like, you have somebody who's just so angry, and he has this hate for no good reason, and this other character who has all this pain and this loss from losing someone that he loves, who's murdered by someone that hates him, and that they're the same person.
I know this is not the first time that we've had, like, an in-depth discussion about this scene in particular. I like to think we're saying new things about it. I think we are, because it still feels like a rich text.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
With that said, I was going to say, do you want me to go to my number 2, because you've got your number 1 left?
That's all we got left. Yeah.
Yeah. So my number 2, because that was my number 1. My number 2 would be the transition itself. The transition between the Galactic Republic and the Galactic Empire. And that would be whether it's Palpatine's speech that results in thunderous applause that Liberty dies within, or whether that would be the Star Destroyers, the Ventators representing them, the Jedi starfighters that are starting to look like TIE fighters, and just the Tantive 3 at the end of the film, the shift, the meaning of the rebels that was cut as a deleted scene. You see this, obviously, this particular element is turned up on steroids in Rogue One, but it's really impressive the way that you're able to set up a transition over 13 years to see the galaxy change, and then set up the galaxy in a position to where you will know exactly what it will look like in 19 years beyond this point, and be able to see that fresh position of all these new things being introduced, the clones and how they will transition to the stormtroopers, the decommissioning of the droids, and the way that the entire dominoes of Palpatine's plan are now just fluttering out into the perfect imperial array. And it's just, the plan has succeeded. And we have now gotten to our position A that we started this entire journey with. And that, of course, beautifully wraps up with the twin sons. But I would say from a more political and infrastructure-based perspective is the true beauty of this film that I really, really love to see, is how well they've positioned the galaxy to transition to the Empire and to the one that we know from 1977.
Yeah, and something else I noticed about this movie when I watched it this time, and it's amazing that I can watch these movies dozens of times and have a completely new take on it. That's like such a wonderful thing that really shows a good movie and a love for a good movie. So obviously, it's an action movie, it's a Star Wars movie, but remove all the action from it, it's the chattiest Star Wars movie, I think, by a landslide. I don't know what like the page count is in the script, but like there are parts of it that almost feel like, you know, a Mammoth play or an episode of The West Wing. Like it just gets really jargony.
I'd say
it's
Empire's
well crafted, and
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I would think Empire is the most words per minute. That'd be my guess.
That's fair, and it's also a political movie, but in different ways. I just think that the prequels get all a kind of a reputation for like being too political, and this movie is super political, but none of the politics don't make sense. Unlike in Phantom Menace, where it's really crowded with politics, it's really
Trade
tidy.
Federation.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's useless to me, but this movie is really, there's not a lot of fat on the politics here, and that makes for the conversations, which do not involve chase sequences or battles, to still be really interesting, because it's like, again, it's like you're watching theater. And so I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and from a political perspective, I think that's a really good point too, in that you have politics that's easy to understand, but politics that's deep, and you can we've already taken a nice deep dive into a couple different points of it here already. But it's interesting that you're not getting the kind of politics that cannot be understood. Like I understood this as an 11-year-old in 2005.
Right.
I understood all of the politics in this movie. I understood none of the politics in any of the Star Wars movies up until this point. And I guarantee you, if I had been 7 years old and watching this movie, I still would have understood the politics in this movie, because it's very straightforward. Now, would I have understood all of the politics? No. But would I understood all of the major plot points? Yes. And that's something I definitely missed in the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones in the times watching that as a little kid. And so I think that it although it is the most adult of the films, it is very accessible. I do know, though, that I listened to a podcast, and in particular, the podcaster's daughter, the only one he's not allowed her to watch is Revenge of the Sith, because it's the most grown-up one, and knows that she is not quite old enough to be able to handle it. And so I think that's interesting. But that scene where he kills the younglings, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example of what kind of like removes it from being a kids movie, because like that is traumatic and wild. An often
killing
sourced
kids
example. It's the main cited example of where the movie gets like darker than you expect anything on Disney.
And maybe
Plus.
darker than is needed.
Sure, absolutely. Listen, this is a great setup for my number one, which is essentially a component of what you just listed. It's just specifically, so this is how Liberty dies, with thunderous applause. This is like a small redemption for an otherwise lacking performance. You've mentioned the flaws in Natalie Portman's performance. Padme deserves so much better. Not better than Natalie Portman, who is all by means a great actor, but a better opportunity to be a greater character. This line demonstrates, I think, her potential as a character in live action. Star Wars is, we've said this before, it's always at its best when it's reflecting relevancy in real life. The concept of wickedness prevailing to a score of ignorant support is all too real. And George Lucas knew that long before this era. He knew it 15 years ago, 16 years ago. He knew it 45 years ago, because he's always been a deeply thoughtful culture critic, and he's used Star Wars to share his feelings on the world.
Turn a mirror to it.
It's not only one of the greatest lines in Star Wars, it is one of the great lines in movies. And in fact, it doesn't get its due. Like, you could look up a lot of listicles about the best lines in Star Wars, and
It made ours.
I am your father. And I mean, it did. You're right. But like most lists would be playing the hits, the do or do not, there is no try, the no, I am your father's. That's fine. I love you, I know. This is not a meme. It's not like a greatest hit. It just happens to be fucking phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's too perfect for me not to put it at number one.
Yeah, I had it within my number two. I had to mention it there. There's no way it was not going to get mentioned. It is a bananas good line for a character with so few good lines, and it's a line that is so instrumental in the purpose of the character and the point and the beginning of the rebellion and why this needed to be used more in the film. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes in Revenge of the Sith, in my opinion, is the deletion of the scene where she meets with Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, and they talk about basically the start of the rebellion. Seems like kind of a useful scene to me, one that should have stayed. But the character is so consistent with the character that we get in the Clone Wars and the character that we get in the novels, and also Leia. And so this is really a powerful line, showing a strong leader. And I mean, that's the thing. Padme has done incredible things in these two movies. It's just we've seen her at her lamest, and in executing those areas in just a really cheesy way. Truly, deeply, madly, hopelessly, endlessly love you. And like, I need to tell you that before we go out and get murdered by all these little bugs. But it's definitely a well-deserved line, and feels out of place for how many bad ones she has, but it is almost like you could build an entire movie around this line. It would just be incredible to see more stories of the potential of what could have been with Padme starting the rebellion, and what Mon Mothma and Bail Organa will do in those early days to kind of honor that. And so I'm curious to know what kind of stories will be told beyond there. And I'm really excited to see, I forget what it's called, Queen's something, the third in the next Padme series of books, the trilogy that will show her perspective of the end of the Clone Wars, which would mean likely up until the end and through the end of her death. And so that'll be extremely interesting to kind of see a live recount of her mind during this time.
Sounds great. Okay, that's our list, right? Do you want to go over a couple of, let's not talk about too many that might have missed the cut, but it's interesting that neither one of us have mentioned the Yoda Palpatine Senate chamber fight at all. And it's, it's a little, I've talked a lot about how I feel about Yoda using his lightsaber. I think like the tossing of the chamber pods is kind of fun.
Yeah, it is cool. I had such a clear top seven, though. It was so easy for me to find my top seven. Like, I went through it. I was like, okay, now let's list my favorite things, like the things that easily need to make my list. And I was like, oh, that's 7. And I couldn't find anything that came close to cracking through those. And so, I mean, from an honorable mentions perspective, I think I got some nice holistic ones. But Obi-Wan, not just at the end of the film, the entire kind of journey that he does on Utapau with Grievous, killing Grievous, that's extremely cool. I think killing Grievous is cooler than the Yoda Palpatine duel. The back and forth before the Yoda Palpatine duel, I prefer. It's when and the kind of the throwing of the Force and how like Yoda catches it, and it's just overall it could have been done maybe a little bit better. It was great in concept, and then throwing the pods is good, but Yoda failing and he kind of loses the lightsaber there. It's just sad.
Yeah, it is.
You don't want him to lose.
Utapau is a pretty cool planet. That's something I
Oh,
really
visually,
connected
yeah.
with in this viewing. Visually, it's like really well designed. I love that hangar is like within the giant skeletal construction. I don't know what the beast was at one point, but like just like the fact that it's all built within these craters. It's very, very cool. The only other moment that I thought is worth mentioning is like the rise of Darth Vader and that first breath. So not the no, but
Yeah.
like that first time you hear him breathe like Darth Vader is, I mean, it's Palpatine putting up the hood for the first time times 100. Like it's a pretty exciting thing. The movie knows that's what you've waited for, and I don't think it's squandered.
No, and I think it's a little cheesy, but it does great for Frankenstein imagery, and I
Yeah.
think that's okay. And the way that the droids are kind of operating on him, the little like the medical like gurney that he's carried on, that's really cool. That entire sequence of taking him to kind of to Coruscant to get fixed up. But yeah, no, overall, honorable mentions. I think we've certainly mentioned a lot of the kind of the broad strokes throughout. But overall, I adore Revenge of the Sith, and some people rank their Star Wars movies based on rewatchability. And if that were the case, it definitely falls extremely high on my list. I mean, it falls high on my list no matter what. But yeah, absolutely love Revenge of the Sith.
It's a good Tamora Morrison movie, more so than I realized. He's all through this thing.
Yeah, and his faces for sure.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be nice to see some more of him. We can use that as a bit of a transition. We will be saying some more of him in later in this year. Kind of just some further discussion about it being the 4-episode miniseries that seems to be just further seeming to be cemented as the way that the Boba Fett show will be. So because that rumor was what we had heard, it does seem to be a correct rumor that we have heard. In addition to that, not a whole lot in the news, but we do have a casting for the Obi-Wan show. So Indira Varma, who is from Game of Thrones, she has been cast as kind of the lead female role in the Obi-Wan show. I'm not sure if this was the same role that was rumored to be for, well, interesting enough, who played Jasmine in the recent Aladdin movie?
I won't be able to remember her name. She's good.
She was rumored to be in the show as the lead female, but there was no rumors of that officially coming as like the casting choice. So might be the case that this is who they went with, but she seems to be a little bit older. No idea what the character is supposed to be playing. We don't really have any idea if it's going to be a major role or a minor role, but we don't have many casting at all for that show. So that's an interesting one to be announced and should be of reasonable size. The Bad Batch as well, that we know is coming out May 4th. That is confirmed, and that is exciting. We don't know how long that show is going to be, but I'll be curious to know if it's 12 episodes, 16 episodes, 20 episodes. I'm going to probably guess it's going to be like 12 or 16 or 18. But I mean, I'm happy either way. They showed an image of what Fennec Shand is going to look like in the Bad Batch. They're keeping solid with the Clone Wars animation style. And I think people believe it's generally going to be the vibe of season 7 is going to be what they're going to try and continue. So that's encouraging because season 7 was definitely off the charts for Clone Wars.
So this is a younger Fennec Shand, obviously.
Yeah. Yep. No. So Boba Fett at this time period is a young teenager, and well, Ming-Na Wen's 57. So if you can, in theory, or make Fennec Shand that old, and ultimately would be in her 20s at this point. So it can certainly work. This would be 6, 10, 29. 28, 29 years before where we are currently now in Mandalorian. So yeah, even she could be 30 for wow, that is, yeah, she does not look 57.
Good for her.
That's
Remarkable.
crazy. Yeah, really not a whole lot else in the news. Anything that you saw? I didn't make a ton of deep notes there, but it didn't seem like anything from a quick pass to the internet.
No, I didn't catch anything other than that note today about the new casting for Obi-Wan. And maybe they're trying really hard to keep that show tight because it's, a show in part about isolation. So it won't surprise me if the cast doesn't need to be giant.
Yeah. Now, she does not have blonde hair, but she has an awfully angular face. So it's not outside the realm that she could be Satine in a flashback. But also maybe she's a Force priestess, which would mean she could be she could be a guide on Obi-Wan's journey to learning how to become a Force ghost, or she could be just some brand new character who is just part of his journey of planet A to planet B, which is probably the most likely.
More than likely she's just a new character. But now that I feel like I have a relationship to Satine, I would certainly like to speculate on that going forward.
Yeah, and that would mean it was extremely worthwhile to show those episodes to you, and the next kind of batch of episodes that will follow the Mandalore-esque arc will reintroduce Maul. So there will be a bunch of great things along those lines.
A few important birthdays. First and foremost, this Thursday, March 4th, happy birthday to you, sir, Ross Arsenault.
Yeah.
Yay. The next day, Friday, March 5th, Jake Lloyd having a birthday. And on Tuesday, March 9th, a happy birthday to Oscar Isaac. So a couple of heavy hitters in there. Listen, we would really love to see everybody else's top 6 list or anything in particular that they like about Revenge of the Sith, especially if it's something we somehow neglected. I feel like we got a pretty comprehensive discussion going about what really rules about episode 3, but no doubt we missed something. So if you have any thoughts on this podcast or Star Wars in general, you can always feel free to contact us on Twitter at Recorder66 or email recorder66podcast@gmail.com. We're available on all major platforms in terms of podcasting, and so please rate and give us a review. There are only like 6 of you, so I'm not talking to the other people who listen to the podcast. I am talking to you, the listener. It would be great if we could have your support in some kind of tangible way, not just to toot our own horns, but because we would love to be able to grow our little tiny Star Wars loving community. We're also on YouTube at Recorder66. We don't have any plans for what's coming up on the podcast going forward, but we'll let you know. And until we are together again,
may the Force be with you.